Welcome to Breaking News. I'm Miley and bring for you latest news on today. In 2009, the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Intelligence and Analysis published a report meant for internal use only. The report argued that the future of terrorism threats against the United States would be in home ground. Domestic terrorism spawned from the right fringes of the political spectrum. Indeed, the 2008 election of America's first non-white president, combined with the economic collapse of 2007 and 2008, had created the fertile ground for hateful right-wing extremism.
Republicans reacted angrily, demanding that Secretary of Homeland Security Janet Napolitano rescind the report. Eventually, it was withdrawn, and by 2010, the DHS no longer had any intelligence analyst working in the field of domestic terrorism, as Darrell Johnson, the report's primary author, detailed for the Washington Post in 2017. Had the report not proved so prophetic about the rise of right-wing extremism in the U.S., it would have been served as a useful example of what my colleague Matt Yglesias calls the hat gap, in which small issues often related to identity politics of older, white conservatives quickly get blown up into national ones thanks to the right-wing media industrial complex. But the report was ultimately prophetic. To read it today, it's to see officials sounding an alarm about the world where extremists illegally occupy federal land, or mail pipe bombs to Democratic Party leaders, or commit mass shootings that target minority groups. It even seems to warn of the rise of a figure like Donald Trump, who might build speeches or rather version of rhetorical extremism that been just barely gossiped up for prime time and who's still perpetually quoting the extremist base. And yet members of the media, especially on television, are reluctant to call actions like mailing pipe bombs to Democrats or shooting up like synagogue terrorism, despite the fact that they are quite literally intended to terrorize certain populations. What makes Fox News successful doesn't have anything to do with the way its anchors report the news, and everything to do with the way the network's inherent slant creates a cozy bubble for its core audience of older, white conservatives. This detail that links Kelly's troubled tenure at NBC's News with the media's unwillingness to call right-wing terrorism, because both stems from news networks' desire to replicate Fox News' success with the older viewers who form the primary audience for the cable news. And in any given week, Fox News ably cycles through any number of the others' Black Lives Matter supporters, Antifa members, Muslims the world over, immigrants, trans people, Democratic politicians, and voters in general.
It doesn't seek to inform, it seeks to placate, to reassure viewers that they are okay and that everything else about the white America is okay too. That's why, when its personalities leave for other news networks, they often wait. Because other news networks still ostensibly have a mission to inform viewers of what happened in the world.
And yet, when it comes to something like the idea of properly labeling domestic terrorism as terrorism, Fox News is an extreme outlier that's still not really outside of the mainstream. All 24-hour news networks are reticent to rattle the cages of status quo too much. Even the left-leaning MSNBC rarely reports on issues like domestic terrorism without a frame of teaching the controversy. Some people say, we should call this terrorism, and what do you think? It's tempting for so many people to think of Donald Trump as an aberration, a weird, over-the-top reaction to a particular moment in history, and in some ways, he is. Certainly, the abject grossness of much of what he says and does are the sort of things more typical Republican politicians wouldn't indulge in. George Bush might have been famous for misspeaking, but he was never so crass. And yet, as essentially any person who pays more attention to policy outcomes than to theatricality of politics will tell you, Trump's platform is more or less a mainstream Republican one. Even the actions he undertakes that draw the most criticism, the family separations at the US-Mexico border, for instance, are tacitly sanctioned by many other Republicans, and his economic policies are straight down the middle for a president for his party. What can make him feel like an aberration? In spite of all of that, are the many dark elements of society he stirred up, sometimes inadvertently but often intentionally. Bush, Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon, they all worked toward divisive policies, but spoke the bland platitudes of coming together as a nation much better than Trump.
And this story appears in Breaking News, a news from us on the latest twists and turns around domestic terrorism. Subscribe and follow us along with more about Trump administration policy. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the duration of today's program. Thank you for watching.